So again, welcome everyone. We are very excited about our webinar today and eager to get started. We want to thank you for joining us for the Perfect Triad, developing a people-focused, performance-driven, coaching-centered culture. And our special guest today is expert Eric Turbiville. And there's a lot to cover today. So one of the things I always really want to make sure I do is invite you folks that are joining us during your lunch break and taking time to be with us to make sure that you get your needs met. So if there is a particular culture development related question or anything that comes up that you're wondering how that might apply to your unique organization or a corporation or nonprofit, we would love for you to share that question with us and chat with us in the chat box. And if there's something that we are unable to answer due to our inability as experts, maybe it's not in our wheelhouse, or perhaps it is, we've run out of time because we've got a lot to cover, don't hesitate to reach out. Even if we don't have that particular expertise, I imagine we know someone that we can refer you to, and we will do our best to support you in that way. So I want to introduce you to our sponsor today is the Whitmarsh Consulting Group and Best Practices in Human Resources. At wcg-bp.com, you find a variety of resources related to best practices in human resources. The Whitmarsh Consulting Group is a group of distinctively skilled experts who specialize in creating revenue streams through digital marketing. If you have an opportunity to work with the Whitmarsh Consulting Group, you'll know how just customized their approach is. So I want to say thank you, David Whitmarsh and the Whitmarsh Consulting Group, and encourage folks on the call to give them a holler should you have digital marketing needs. So let's move right along. I want to say hello. Actually, I want to introduce myself. My name is Anissa Avon, and I am the CEO of Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. Founded in 2004, Turnkey is a full-service employee development and learning solutions provider and consultancy firm. We have expert coaches, trainers, and OD consultants in every major metropolitan area in the U.S. and in key hubs across the globe. So if your organization has employee development needs, from assessments to coaching to frontline supervisor all the way through mid-level and hypo and even executive level training, even team development or strategic planning, it would be our privilege to learn more about your organization and support your goals. So like I said earlier, if we're not the right fit, I bet we know someone who is. Also, I want to bring your attention to, at the end of the webinar today, we will be inviting our participants to a fast pass strategy session. It is simply a 60-minute consulting session with our goal is to support you in having an actionable strategy with a minimum of 3 actionable strategy/action plans that you can take to implement or to create a plan for your employee development goals this next year. So now I am excited and honored to introduce our guest expert. Eric Turbiville is one of our esteemed coaches, and his love for coaching and developing people and leaders will come out clearly in today's webinar. He has coached and mentored just many executive leaders across multiple industries, and his depth of experience through hands-on coaching and training cannot be understated. He is an ICF credentialed professional certified coach, and anyone on the call that knows what that takes, it's a lot to become a PCC certified coach. He has also led very large, high-performing sales and market access teams as an executive at Fortune 500 companies. He most recently led a large sales team that produced over $2 billion in annual revenue. He has an MBA and a BA from Brigham Young University, and he graduated cum laude. So his focus is on helping organizations develop people-focused and performance-driven cultures. And the unique thing about Eric is that he does have both a depth and width of experience in coaching and developing leaders and employees, but he's also been an executive himself. So this is not just some theory he read in a book. He's seen what it takes inside organizations to produce results. So what did I miss, Eric? What makes you an expert on culture and culture development?
Thanks, Anissa. You know, you kind of hit on it. I spent the last 25 years working in and with organizations, including several Fortune 500 companies that had various cultures. And I found that companies that have certain elements of their culture are much more successful at engaging employees and at performing at high levels. And today I'll speak about some of those cultural elements.
Excellent. Excellent. Super excited to get started. You should have control now of your screen. Is it allowing you to move forward?
Let's see. Yes, it is. All right. So I know it's a mouthful, the Perfect Triad Culture, I've named it, and it's about having a people-focused, a coaching-centered, and a performance-driven approach. And what you're going to see is that all three go hand in hand with what an ideal company culture should look like. And companies are missing a big opportunity if you leave out one of these elements because they truly build on each other. So during this webinar, I'm going to review each element of the Perfect Triad Culture and what it looks like and how to implement it in your organization. So Sean Parr said, culture is the environment in which your strategy and your brand thrives or dies a slow death. And I truly believe that. Depending on your culture is gonna basically depend on your success. So as we define a culture, it has three components. It has the unwritten, and usually there are implicit beliefs revealed in the words and actions of leaders. And it has values, which these values are critical. And it's critical specifically that the employees' values align with the values of the company. And then behaviors, what leaders, especially senior leaders, do that determine the culture. And there's this concept that while the culture shapes the behavior of employees, the people's beliefs, values, and behaviors also can shape the culture. And along with these concepts, a culture is truly a collective personality. It's the history of the company, it's the environment in which it operates, and it's the leader's actions, values, and behaviors. So when you think about cultural reinforcement, first of all, think about the stories, legends, or myths that a company carries. I think specifically about a legend of FedEx's Fred Smith taking a trip to Las Vegas to make payroll early in company history. And luckily he was a winner that day and he was able to make payroll. It also comes in statements and slogans. One company, Bristol Myers Squibb, talks about extending and enhancing human life. Then there's the reality. So is the cultural norm and values aligned with what the culture and the leaders actually do? And, you know, think of one poor example of alignment, and you can go back to Enron and a number of companies where their actions didn't align with the stated culture. There's also crisis situations where you look at the leader's reaction to the crisis and you just determine if it's congruent with the culture. And it's important that leaders and employees have the ability to preserve culture by nourishing and growing it. And you nourish a culture with current employees through reinforcement, and you grow it through future employees by hiring cultural fits. And we'll talk more about the importance of cultural fit. So we have a polling question, and we'll talk more about coaching later, but we want to get a feel for how effective do you believe that you are at coaching your direct reports. So are you very effective, like in the top 50% of the company, somewhat ineffective at the bottom 50% of the company, or ineffective meaning that you don't coach at all? So go ahead and take the poll.
Let's Excellent. While we are giving them a moment to respond, one of the things that you and I have spoken about is, we jump right into culture development and how to create a great culture. And I think it goes without saying, most of the folks on the call have an interest in developing culture and understanding how to retain and engage employees. But sometimes when they're selling the idea of culture development to those who control the purse strings, for example, board members, other executives, et cetera, one of the things that I want to ask you about is, the recent SHRM Global Force, I think it's Employee Recognition Survey, said the top 3 workforce management challenges are retention, turnover, engagement, and recruitment. How does culture and putting our focus on culture development address those 3 issues: retention, engagement, recruitment?
Yeah, so it's very important. I'll go to the last one first, the recruiting. People with social media nowadays understand and can get a very good sense of the culture of a company. And especially the millennials are looking at cultural fit and if the company represents what they want in their lives and in their professional careers. So if your culture is not aligned with a future employee, a potential employee, especially millennials, you're going to have trouble really getting those people into your organization. And certainly, as we'll see later in the presentation, engagement, retention is very much tied to the type of culture that your organization has. We talk a lot about people leave bosses, supervisors, but the reality is people leave cultures too for very specific reasons because they're not aligned with their beliefs. All right.
Very good. So here's our poll results. Looks like about 30% they've got, their skills sharpened and are very effective, or believe they are, right? Or very effective or effective. That's about 80%. So I'm not surprised. We have a pretty progressive audience. And then there's a certain percentage of us who just know, what? Coaching? Well, maybe I'm not coaching at all. So there we have it.
All right, and I'm going to guess some of you folks who said ineffective, don't coach at all, you may not have potentially direct reports to coach, but I would tell you can be a titleless leader and coach if you did answer it because of that, and you can still coach and impact other people. All right, so let's go into the first component of the Perfect Triad culture, and that is being people-focused. I think that Richard Branson, the founder of the Virgin Group, said it best. He said, clients do not come first, employees come first. If you take care of your employees, they will take care of the clients. And if you look at Virgin, they have one of the most effective people-focused cultures in the world. Richard Branson created a core set of values based on a people-focused approach to the business, and he constantly reinforces it through modeling of his leadership. And he's truly created not just a people-focused organization, but very much a performance-driven culture for the Virgin Group. So why people-focused leadership? Well, I've been a strong believer over the years that people are not assets or human capital, they're human beings. And if you focus on the business first, you're going to forget that all business comes through people. People buy from and they do business with other people. And people are the core of any business. People create the products, they interface with the customers and vendors, and they represent your company. Being people-focused gives a company a competitive advantage that is difficult to replicate. You can replicate certain processes and things like that in an organization, but you can't replicate a culture. And then finally, I've always been a believer that if you genuinely care about people and you show respect to them and build mutual trust, they'll be more productive and help drive more revenue for your company. And it basically goes without saying that loyal employees are extremely valuable. because they become advocates of your company, your culture, and oops, I better skip this version. And they become advocates of your company. And that goes back to Anissa's original question, the concern about retaining employees and also recruiting people, because your people will become advocates if you're people focused in your organization.
There's something that you said earlier is very important. You can't, and forgive me, you may have to repeat it, but what I took away is you can't force culture, you can't duplicate culture, you can't say we're going to have a positive culture and expect everyone to just get in line with that. There is a fostering of that is required. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's that nurturing of a culture, and if you look at cultures, every founder, every senior leader, CEO, etc., are different. And if the founder sets a very strong culture, then future CEOs have to follow that culture. And I'll give you some examples of great people-focused cultures that fell by the wayside when new leadership came in and took over the founder's responsibility. So as you look at great companies, people are included in their strategies. In fact, the strategy is built around the employees. And as I mentioned before, a people-focused culture is hard to duplicate, and it can be a serious competitive advantage. If you look at talent strategy, the onboarding process, mentoring, and learning and development, these are all critical. And, to keep a good culture, you've got to have talent reviews, succession planning, and ensure that you're developing the right people in your organization. And, interestingly enough, the number 2 reason that people leave their jobs is because of lack of development. And this is even more important with the millennials, as I discussed a little bit about how they want companies that fit their values. They want to grow and develop, and they want companies that value them, and they want companies that have those strong core values and that care about the people. So let me give you an example of a great people-focused culture. So Costco was founded in 1983 in Seattle. And here's a list of some of the values of the co-founder, Jim Sinegal. His big one was to take care of employees because he believed that they would take care of customers and suppliers. He believed in doing the right things. He wanted opportunities for employee growth and development. In fact, if you look at the management staff of Costco, almost every one of them has been developed from inside the company. And of course, he also believed in having gender equality. And if you know anything about Costco, you know that they're known for leading in pay and health benefits. They take care of their employees with high pay compared to other competitors. They give them benefits and those internal promotional opportunities. And several times, they've been pressured by Wall Street to change their culture, basically to lower pay and take away benefits. But Costco always came back, their leadership has always come back and said, no, we're putting employees first and we're not changing our culture. So think of that impact on the employees when the CEO refused to change the culture despite Wall Street pressure. He stuck to his core values, and he was a shadow of a leader, and he set the tone for the organization. So what were the results for Costco? Well, they have an extremely high employee retention rate. Now, one of their big competitors is Walmart, and I can promise you and assure you that Walmart does not have a 94% employee retention rate. And again, going back to the importance of culture for retention, this is a great example. When you look at Costco's employees, they generate 3 times the revenue of a Walmart or Target employee. And their stock price speaks for itself, a growth of 15 to 16% per year for 3 decades. Great customer retention, and not surprisingly, their new CEO, Craig Jelinek, was voted the most likable CEO in the world. So what are some lessons from Costco? Well, if you remember that culture is beliefs, values, and behaviors, First of all, the leaders and employees believe in and behave in congruency with the values established by the founder. The Costco culture has been preserved even with leadership changes. And I mentioned some of these things, but I want to go down to the fifth bullet point. They hire cultural fits. And if you look at that, that is one of the most important things you do as a hiring manager is you hire people that fit your culture, because you can teach skills and competencies, but you can't teach cultural fit. And just an aside, one of Costco's fiercest competitors, Walmart, was originally a people-focused company under Sam Walton. In fact, Mr. Walton believed that if he looked after people, people would look after him. And the problem with Walmart now is that after Sam Walton's death, Walmart's culture slowly went from people-focused to people don't matter. In fact, over the past 15 years, they've been entrenched in problems with how they treat employees and customers. And the treatment of customers shouldn't surprise you, because if you don't treat employees right, they're not going to treat your customers right. So again, this just confirms that a change in leadership can change the culture if it's not guarded, protected, nourished, and lived. So we'll move to the second element of the Perfect Triad culture, and that's having an organization that's coaching centered. And I think we have another poll question here. Yes, so this one is, if you were to survey your direct reports, how effective would they say your coaching is? So very effective, effective, somewhat ineffective, or ineffective completely because you're not coaching.
You know, something that you said earlier really reminds me of an article that I read recently. I want to say it was on Fortune, but I better not misquote myself. But it was addressing the fact that in some cultures, the free food and the nice lounge areas and the bar and the, you know, full-time 24-hour gym, all of those things are great, and certainly if I were to work for an organization, I'd love the free food. But the research is now in, and it was Qualtrics that was quoted in the article as saying, you know, the research shows that only goes so far. It must be coupled with a values-based approach within the management. So when the CEO, as you've mentioned, comes in and sets the tone for this is how we're going to treat our people, these are our values, and cascades that down, it must also be adhered to in a congruent way, and those core values must permeate the culture through the management. What is your experience with that as well as in regards to cascading the values down through the organization and versus, hey, let's just give us some free food? So
yeah, I think they nailed it. Those things are nice to haves, but the must have is a strong culture. And I'll give you an example. I work with a CEO in Austin, Texas, of a tech company, and his company is more of a blue collar approach where they're more interested in fairness and working hard and promoting from within. And they don't have, you know, you don't play ping pong at lunch and do all those other fun things that some companies like to have. But their culture is extremely strong and they have a very high retention rate. So yeah, short answer is I totally agree with that survey.
I'm going to share the results now. So isn't that interesting regarding how, if they were to survey your direct reports, how effective would they say? And so we have close to what we had before, a little bit less on the very effective or effective. Some folks had some insight regarding, yeah, they might think I'm not as effective as I'd like to be. And then ineffective, I don't coach at all.
Yeah, so this is interesting. And I would say that If you compare this with other surveys of Fortune 500 companies, in fact, there was one survey where the leaders were first ranked themselves, and they ranked themselves in the 80th percentile of their coaching of their direct reports. Now, unfortunately, when their direct reports answered this question, how effective is your supervisor at coaching, they ranked their bosses in the 30th percentile. So there's this disconnect between what, how you think you're coaching and how your direct reports think you're coaching in general in organizations. So that's some good food for thought as we talk through this. Okay, so why coaching? I think everybody on the phone values coaching and understands the value of why coaching. As you look at the three elements, again, the components of the Perfect Triad culture complement each other. And when a leader coaches employees, it really is the ultimate demonstration that you are people focused and you care and respect your people. Now, everybody needs coaching, in my view. An outside perspective is great to improve smarter thinking and better solutions. And it's so important that to have effective coaching, that your coaches are asking really thought-provoking, even catalytic questions. And what you find is that you have to ask the right question to come to the right solution. And so let me give you a little bit more on coaching, and then I'm going to give you a great example of later a catalytic question as we go through this coaching discussion. The nice thing about coaching is that it truly takes the responsibility off of the coach and it puts it on the employee. It engenders more accountability and ownership. The employee or coachee, however you want to refer to them, they learn to ask the right question and develop better solutions when their leader's not there. And you also need to remember the situational leadership principles. And what that basically means is that everybody's in a different space with what they need from coaching. And certainly when you have someone who's new to a position or inexperienced, you have to be a little more directional in your coaching than when someone is more experienced and understands exactly what they need to be doing. So as we look at this, the coaching-centered leadership, it's all about your commitment to the employee. It's all about you showing the employee how important they are and building that mutual trust and modeling the behavior of a coach. And that modeling is what truly helps, especially at senior levels, people to understand just how important coaching is. And in a recent Deloitte study, it showed that effective, consistent coaching is highly correlated with better business performance, higher employee engagement, and greater retention. And as we mentioned previously, retention is so important today. This year in 2018, there have been, and will be as we finish out this month, about 42 million employees that change their jobs. So,
wow.
That's a lot of people. Yeah. And I read the June job report, and there were 7 million people who left their jobs
in June
for other positions. Yeah, just in June alone. So, this number could actually, this was a number that was predicted towards the beginning of the year. That number actually may be higher. So, the other thing that I've always believed as a leader is that you have touch points with employees, and each of these touch points can be a coaching moment for that employee. And it's important that the leaders listen to, coach, teach, and inspire employees, because these are the things that mobilize the employees to exceed company expectations. And it truly is the coaching and development role of leaders that is the most valuable to an organization. So I want to introduce this concept of a leader coach. And I believe that organizations have to approach coaching and set forth this principle of leader coach. It's important to recognize that coaching is like leadership. It's an iterative process and a journey, and leaders should always be striving to be better coaches. And we all know no one's a perfect coach. We're all learning and improving. And as you look at a leader coach engenders confidence in the ability of the employee, helps her believe that she can do the job successfully, especially when the leader coach understands and leverages the employee's strengths. The employee's got to know their own outcome and own it, but needs the autonomy to complete the task. So share with me what you want me to do as an employee, but let me figure out how to do it on my own, and to do it kind of my way. And as a leader coach, you've got to partner with employees to help her think more creatively so that they can solve business challenges and exploit opportunities. And as I said before, leaders have to teach and coach their employees to think more effectively. And finally, there's this accountability, and there's a principle which I call return and report. And it's essentially that after a coaching session or during a coaching session, an employee decides and commits to do certain things. And it's the employee's responsibility to come back and return and report on what was actually completed. Now that's a lofty goal, because a lot of times a leader has to go back and follow up with the employee, but that's what an employee should be doing. So this power of questions. So management guru Peter Drucker said this. He said, the important and difficult job is never to find the right answers. It's to find the right question. For there are few things as useless, if not dangerous, as the right answer to the wrong question. So again, you want to be able to help people answer and ask the right questions. So here's an example. I promised you an example of a great catalytic question. This was Edwin Land's granddaughter in 1943. She asked him, why can't I see the picture you've taken right now? And as you all know, about 2 years later or so, he introduced the Polaroid camera. And we all know the Polaroid camera was the first camera that could produce a photo within seconds. As I think about some of the great types of coaching questions, the top three to me are insight generation, understanding motivation, and leadership. And insight generation is more about finding out what an employee's perspective is on something. It's what has to happen in order for you to feel blank. And I'll tell you, a great question you can ask your spouse or significant other is what has to happen in order for you to feel loved? And, that's a personal example, but I can promise you, you will get all kinds of answers that you never dreamed of if you haven't been talking and listening to your spouse or significant other. And then understanding motivation. What motivates the employee? What gives them the greatest sense of purpose? Under leadership, you've got to be asking the question how they like to be coached is a great example of a question. And then two other types of great coaching questions are around team.
I want to go back and if you'll go one slide back, one of the things that this maps to, and some of the research that SHRM has put out recently around workplace coaching and culture development and best places to work, etc., award-winning workplaces, is this piece about career management and helping employees identify what they want with their career. Most supervisors, when we go into training and development opportunities, see coaching as strictly performance related. How can I get this direct report to do more of what I want the way I want it for us to achieve our goals? And while there's room for that, and in fact there needs to be a performance management related coach approach, is what I'm understanding you're suggesting, Eric. How do really effective managers also set aside their personal interests and spend sufficient, not too much but not too little, time supporting their direct reports in their career development, and knowing if they do have goals, helping them to identify those goals and how they might foster those pursuits or inspirations, aspirations within the company. How do good managers foster that kind of coaching relationship also? Okay, folks that are on the call, can you guys hear Eric? Is it just me? Let me know in the chat box. Oh, Sheila says no audio for Eric. Thank you, Carrie. Carrie says she cannot hear either. So I am.
All righty. So I think we launched then the polling question. So this is around, does my supervisor know how I like to be coached? So have you communicated it clearly? Do you just communicate it during coaching sessions? Have you not communicated at all? Or does your supervisor not coach you? So yeah, so 58%, more than half, actually have either not had a chance to communicate how they like to be coached, or they just don't get coached. So that's very interesting and not uncommon. And you know, as employees, it's so important that we ensure that our supervisors know how we want to be coached. And I've used over the years a tool that really helps me understand how my direct reports and how other people would like to be coached. And these are just some examples of some of the questions. What you need and expect from a coach, how a coach can best support you. Anissa, you talked about developmental opportunities earlier. So how can, you know, the coach assist me with those things, other parts of my career that I'm interested in, not just performance. And, you know, a basic stop, start, continue. So you essentially need to peel back the onion in this case on how people want to be coached that you're leading. So we look at this, how do you like to be coached? And again, it's so important that you communicate those desires to your leader. And so let's go to the next polling question. Do I know how my direct reports like to be coached? So the options are, I've asked each of my direct reports how they like to be coached. I've asked some of my direct reports. I already know how they like to be coached. I don't need to ask them. I've never asked my direct reports, or this is a great idea, I'll ask.
You know, while we're waiting for that, I find this to be such a fascinating question. And for years now, being that I trained as a coach, started when my son was an infant. So that was about 21 years ago. And so as parents and anyone that's in a relationship, this is something that you can try on your significant other. You can try on a family member or your children as well, which is share with me. I have a teenage daughter. So my line that seems to work is help me speak to you in a way where you can hear what I'm asking. Help me to understand what it is you need from me. For you to understand, you may not go out after 10 p.m. or whatever it is. And amazingly enough, she will answer. She'll say, well, you need not to you can't raise your voice at me. Or you need to know that I'm a straight A student, and so sometimes I should get a little leeway. It opens up dialogue in a way that without that coaching skill, there's no way I would ever be able to enter that dialogue with her.
That's a great question.
All right, it looks like we have some results here.
Okay, so let's see here. We got about 40% have an idea of how people want to be coached, but 60% have never asked. And 20 of those percent think that it's a great idea. So good, we're making progress. That's excellent. Yeah. So okay. So let's just wrap up the.
Get that off the screen there.
Yep, I just got it, I think.
All right.
So this part about how your people want to be coached, you need to know not only how they want to be coached, but also what are their motivators. And I would challenge each of you that if you have not asked these questions directly, that you actually ask the questions and that you write down and keep on file how they like to be coached, so that each time you have a coaching situation, you can review if you need to how they like to be coached. Okay, I think I lost control for a minute. Could you go to the next slide?
Sure. Oh, it does give me the, okay, let me It's not allowing me either. So try again, Eric. Let's see if it's going to cooperate with you. Well, it's not cooperating, is it?
No, it's not.
I am going to request remote control, and then I'm going to give it back to you in case that's
all righty.
All right, we're moving along.
Okay, so I'll go through this briefly, but I just want to stress upon you the importance of gaining support of senior leadership in any element, actually, of this perfect triad culture. And a couple of best practices that I've seen companies where senior managers and leaders actually go through real coach training, where they go through a school and they go through a certification process to become better coaches. And I would also just say on this particular slide that every leader needs to be trained on effective coaching, from your first line to your top line leaders. They need to be coached on how to be a good coach and how to ask great, effective questions. All right, so let's go to the third element or component of the perfect triad culture, and that's being performance driven. Now, all of these build upon each other, as I mentioned previously. When you have the coaching-centered leadership and development and the people-focused leadership and development, it leads you to having a performance-driven culture. If you look around the middle ring there, in order to have a performance-driven leadership culture, you have to define the expectations, then you have to communicate them and align them with your organization and with your leaders. Then the next element is observing performance, giving that coaching and feedback and having those candid conversations. And I will note, there's a big difference between coaching and feedback. Coaching, just briefly, is looking at future behaviors. Feedback is looking at past and current behaviors. Coaching is inquiry oriented, and feedback is really scrutiny oriented. What have you done and what do you need to do moving forward? And then coaching is advocating optimal performance, whereas feedback is reinforcing appropriate behavior. So once you have all those types of conversations, then the employee needs to make some adjustments, and sometimes the leader needs to make adjustments. And then there needs to be that follow-up and the returning and reporting on the actions that the employee committed to make. So as we look at a performance-driven leadership approach in order to have a performance-driven culture, it does start with the clear expectations. It starts with asking those catalytic questions and then listening to your employees. And then it's not enough to say that you want your team to win if you're a leader, or to be number one. You got to help them figure out how to achieve it and what's expected and what it will take to truly succeed. And then you've got to have that shared accountability along with those candid discussions and reinforcing the expected behaviors along the way, and coaching along the way too. So I think there's 6 keys to performance-driven leadership. We have already talked in depth about being people-focused, but the second bullet point about performance and success, you've got to help people understand how they'll know if they're performing well and identify the actions that must be taken. And then again, the clear expectations are vital, because if people aren't clear about what they need to do on a daily basis, they're going to struggle to make the right decisions. Number 4 is coaching for performance. And, we've talked at length about coaching, but the one thing I would say, and I'll give you a quick example, is having a performance management system in place in your organization. I'm currently working with a Fortune 100 company that has an organization that's very much underperforming. And in fact, they only have 2 employees, and this is a sales force, on performance improvement plans. And the question that I would ask is this company executing an effective performance improvement plan or performance management system? The answer is, obviously, clearly not. And so what's happening, what we've discovered so far, is that the leaders are not having candid conversations about not only poor performance, but also about good performance. And then the last two elements of a performance-driven leadership approach to develop that type of culture is inspiring and motivating your employees. And really it's mobilizing more than motivating, because I've never been a believer that you can motivate somebody. You can just inspire them to their motivators. And interestingly enough, I was talking to an organization, to their training department, and they said the number one thing that our first and second line managers ask us to do is to provide them training on how to inspire and mobilize their team. And guess what is the last thing on the training team's agenda, or what they're actually doing? Teaching them to inspire and mobilize a team. So there's a huge disconnect there. And then the final one is just holding people accountable. We've talked about that at length, so I won't go through that again. So I love this slide. I used to be a Charlie Sheen fan, and of course he kind of lost it for a while, and he came up with the word winning. And so here's some myths about winning. If you focus on winning, it will happen. Well, that's just not the case. Winning means you're number one at what you do. That doesn't necessarily define what winning or being successful are. And you don't need to define what winning looks like. Well, the reality is that you have to define what performance and winning looks like. And you have to focus on the process to achieve it. And identifying the skills and behaviors are critical. And you have to ensure that you're coaching to these skills and behaviors so that your team is improving and developing their competencies. So again, as you look at winning, or if you prefer success, it is a process. It's not a destination. And you have to have a company-wide culture that really prioritizes being a high-performance organization. And again, you must not just focus on the actions, but you gotta talk about the competencies and skills along with those actions in order to be successful. And as I think about setting those clear expectations, I think about the question, what must be done for the team to be effective and successful? So part of those expectations can come from the team based on the expectations that you set. They have to set expectations for themselves. So as we start to wrap up, I just want to just say a couple more things about culture. First of all, it starts with senior leadership. If you can't get senior leadership on board, it makes it very challenging to change or to really nourish and grow a culture. Simon Sinek talks a lot about the why of companies, having a strong purpose, because that will engage and inspire your people. And one other thing on this one I would just want to add is that the autonomy with the accountability is so critical. You know, your people need to have autonomy to perform and to do things, you know, that are aligned with their skills, that are aligned with their strengths, that are aligned with the way that they go about doing the job. And then just some final thoughts on culture. Again, it can be a competitive advantage. It's difficult to duplicate, as I've mentioned previously. Your culture truly can help you retain and engage your employees. And, you know, again, people, especially millennials, they stay with companies that have values that are strong and that are aligned with their needs, especially developmental opportunities that they want in their career. Now, I'll say this as you look at this slide. If your culture is not perfect, and I'm going to guess that very few of them are, focus on only a few things at a change. Focus on only a few changes at a time. And what I mean by that is align those changes. Maybe it's you want to really focus on coaching and developing your people, as you know, aligned with an initiative to grow business or to grow in a specific market or to grow in whatever capacity that you're leading at the time.
On that very note,
yeah.
I just want to add that we've seen significant improvement with organizations who take their recognition programs, whatever those might be, and instead of tying those to just revenue generating performance metrics, for example, strategic metrics, tying them to the organizational values that they are seeking to uphold, and those units end up changing faster into the culture they want, and in general those organizations are showing to outperform all other programs that recognize for sales or revenue or profitability, any of the other pieces that are more traditional. So one culture change initiative that seems to be working is making sure that your recognition programs also tie into organizational values.
Yeah, that is a critical point. Thanks, Anissa. That is very important. So just to wrap up, I gave you the example of Costco as really being people focused and being part of this perfect triad culture that companies should focus on trying to achieve. Again, for them, Herb Kelleher, their co-founder, he was very much about the people. And if you ask him, he would say that customers aren't always right, that this is about employees, and that if you put your people first, they're going to take care of you. They're also coaching centered, and they coach and model based on example. I mean, Herb Kelleher has stories about him where he sat in the very back seat of a plane in the middle seat and got up during the flight and helped the flight attendants hand out drinks and peanuts. So, he coaches his people through modeling, which I think is critical. And then if you look at the performance of Southwest Airlines, 45 consecutive years of having profitability. So, they're not just successful, in this case, Southwest Airlines, because they're a low-cost airline. They're successful because they truly have a people-focused, coaching-centered, and performance-driven culture. So with that, Anissa, I'll turn this over to you.
Fantastic.
If you want to take control.
I know that we don't have a lot of time for questions and answers, but Eric, if you can stick around for just a minute, anyone that has a question, feel free to enter that into the chat box. And also, I want to share Eric's information, how to get a hold of Eric, as well as talk about the Fast Pass strategy session that I mentioned earlier. So Eric and myself are both open to supporting those on the call with your goals. We'd love to hear what your organizational goals are, perhaps what your takeaways from this particular webinar was, and how we can support you in implementing it, whether that's with our help or on your own. We would love to have the opportunity to support you in that way. So I want to talk very specifically about what a 60-minute consultation would look like with Eric, for example. We begin with what your organization can do right now to create, build, and develop a people-focused leadership approach. So of course that would look at what are you currently doing, what's working, what's not. All right, let's shift gears. Where do you want to go? In order to figure out the answer to that question, what can you do to create, build, and develop a people-focused leadership approach? Moving into the second piece of the consultation is about how your organization can develop a coaching-centered leadership approach. And where that often has to start is once again, where are you? Are your leaders currently taking a coach approach to leadership? And if they are, how good are they? Do we need to develop them from the very rudimentary phases, the kindergarten level of coaching, or can we go in and fine tune? Can you create some champions of change that will support your internal leaders in becoming more coach-like in their approach? And then finally, number 3, how to build high-performing teams within your organization. It's one thing to know where you're headed, part 1. Second thing to know how you're going to get there, part 2. And finally, what's the future look like when you integrate it all together in a team-based, coaching, performance-driven culture? So did I miss anything, Eric?
No, I think that covers it. That's a great opportunity to get more information from myself or from Anissa. We'd love to help you.
Absolutely. So, Eric, fantastic. Like I said earlier, this was a really tight webinar with lots of information and lots of ideas that I think people can take and run with. So, if you're on the call, I just want to again say thank you for honoring us with your presence and joining us over your lunch hour. We know you've got lots of choices and you decided to spend your time with us. So, thank you. If we may be of service, don't hesitate to give us a call, 281-469-4244. And as always, we would love to hear how we might be of service, how our future, and what topics any of our future webinars you'd like to see. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday season. And Eric, thank you for bringing your expertise to us today.
Okay, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thanks so much.